Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. We've got the team here today. We've got Richard, Lisa and Laura back. And we wanted to talk about something really important because we're going through the leadership election and all this high-profile sort of issues that come up with leading the party and being a figurehead. But actually, our party's run and our successes are made by our unsung heroes, the people behind the scenes that don't get the attention that they absolutely deserve. So this episode is going to be dedicated to those people that have inspired us and the different roles that people do within the party that sometimes just don't get enough attention either. So, and this was actually Lisa's idea. So, Lisa, over to you really. Who is your kind of unsung hero?
So I'm going to talk about a friend of mine who died earlier this year. And she was called Marian Oswald, and she died at the age of 90. And Mary had been a Liberal and then a Liberal Democrat for over 70 years. And she was never elected. She did things in our local party. She was our president, and for a little while she'd sat on the exec in different ways. But the key thing she was known for was her baking and her absolutely phenomenal pavlova. And Mary was a stalwart member of our fundraising and events committee, and so she made sure that the catering was top notch at our events, because as everybody knows, fundraising events are really important, yes, for the money that they bring in, but primarily as a social event and as a way of making sure that you feel like a team, and so you can act like a team when the time comes. And Mary was a former head teacher, so she'd been a teacher in the ward that I now represent. She'd been the founding head teacher of a new primary school next to a council estate. And she was known as the NUT rep, and she was known as quite a formidable person. She was quite waspish, and so you were never in any doubt as to how she felt about what you were currently doing or wearing or saying. And she was lots of fun as well. She spent one Christmas with us, and I miss her a lot. But the reason why she's my unsung hero is because she wasn't, lots of us who stand for election can veer towards the quite liking the attention sometimes, but she wasn't like that. She was desperate for us to win stuff, and she was so proud when we did well and so disappointed when we didn't. And she was a really, really big part of our team. And so that's why Mary is my unsung hero.
And through the course of this debate, people who are watching and listening, we're going to talk about, like I say, some of the roles that people can do. So that, as Lisa said, we're talking about people who do the fundraising. We've talked about the three kind of pillars of a successful campaign being manpower, data, but also money. And you can't, and these roles are really important for that. And Richard, I believe your person that you want to highlight, it goes back even further.
Absolutely, but also dead. I joined the party, which was then the Liberal Party, 53 years ago. I can remember the address, 72 Turpin Green Lane, Leyland. And someone more illustrious than me joined at exactly the same place 17 years later, and that was Tim Farron. And the person that lived there was a magnificent woman called Neva Orrell. And Neva was one of two councillors, and they were very rare before 1973, but two Liberal councillors on Leyland Urban District Council. And this is at a time when there are about 50,000 principal councillors in England, and we had 330 of them. So to have a group of two was quite an achievement. She was the absolute embodiment of liberalism and activism. She was active in her ward. She was known throughout the whole of Leyland. She ran the winter and summer fairs for the Liberal Democrats. You turned up to a meeting. She had 2 suitcases with her. And in the suitcases were things she could sell. Her house was always open. When I joined the Young Liberals, we used to have a fortnightly meeting there. And she inspired her son, Keith, who is actually now a Liberal Democrat cabinet member in York, was formerly the leader on one of our councils up in the northeast. So a magnificent woman in principle, a hard worker for the party, for her constituents and her council. And she did all that at the same time as being a head teacher of a special school. And that's my inspiration. Sometimes I'm not going out again. And I think neither Oral would. So I do.
Laura, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated that both of the people you've mentioned are teachers and retired teachers, because I think one of the things, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this as well, but one of the things I really noticed since I got involved in politics is that, like, retired teachers are like a glue that holds society together. And like every time you go to a community group or like, you know, the chair will sit down and they'll have this way of sitting down where like you instantly feel obliged to sit down even though they haven't said anything. And you'll think, hang on a minute, this is another retired teacher. And like, and you know, once you start noticing, you know, they're everywhere, and it's kind of incredible. And it does show what, you know, amazing people that we have, you know, running our schools, because they are the kind of people who retire and then have to keep giving back to their communities and keep going. And like I you know, it's really like every time it's kind of uncanny. And you know, if I think about our amazing team in Sheffield, you know, there's people like John Dryden, my campaign manager, and Amanda, who runs our office, like, and is the local party secretary. And you know, all of these people who are, a lot of them are retired teachers. But the person I actually want to speak about is another teacher who is also retired, but was not at the time that the story happened, which was actually when I was at school. And I think I must have been about 10. And I was speaking to my history teacher, who's a man called Richard Martin. And he said that he was standing for elections in the local council elections, but he wasn't expecting to win. It was a thing called a paper candidate. And, you know, we all said, why would you stand for election if you're not going to win? That's silly. And he said that it was important for democracy, because democracy doesn't work if people don't have a choice in who they vote for. And so he needed to stand so that people would have the opportunity to vote Liberal Democrat if they wanted to. And, you know, I don't remember a lot of conversations from when I was 10. Like, I can probably count on one hand the number of conversations that I had when I was 10 that I can still remember. But, you know, this one was obviously something that I realized, you know, at the time somehow, that it was important, because it stuck with me all these years. And that there are these people who, you know, without any expectation of any, you know, reward or any, you know, even much thanks, will keep doing something because they realize that it matters, because they realize that our values matter. And that you have to, what we do, it's not just about the party, it's also about, you know, democracy. And especially, you know, the act of standing as a paper candidate in a ward that you don't expect to win. It's, you know, an act of such profound public service, you know, not only for the party, but also for the voters in that ward. Because, you know, people in that ward or that constituency should have the opportunity to vote Liberal Democrat. Even if they're not going to take it, you know, they should have that opportunity, because otherwise democracy doesn't work. And yeah, so Rich Martin and people like him, I think, are someone we all need to be grateful for.
And I think we see. I had an example as well. Who's a retired teacher. So I'm not going to use that now. It feels very, because
don't leave him out.
Well, the guy I was going to mention is, if anyone who's known Preston politics any time knows about Alan Hackett, and he is the most unassuming, lovely bloke you would ever think. He was the councillor in my ward for 20 years before me, but you wouldn't know. Every other second when he's not doing that, he was helping a local charity, or he was helping the local theatre group. He was an absolute stalwart who nobody, maybe outside of press, will know who he is. You know, he's not. He was and I can remember nearly being in tears when he got made an alderman of the city a few years ago. And he's still alive, and he's you know, he's mid-80s now. Rang me up a few days ago. He's been shielding. And as soon as shielding went, he said, "Right, give me some leaflets." He still, you know, it was that kind of guy. And you know, if there's anything he could do, he would want to do it. But because we've used lots of examples, I mean, he was my inspiration. Like a bit like, you know, it's kind of the use of the old West Wing thing. What would Leo do? My thing was, what would Alan do? That was it. You know, sometimes when I get enraged by something, you just think he was the most mild-mannered guy. He would smile at people, and then out campaign them and beat them on the ballot box. He was the perfect example of what I strive to be as a Lib Dem. But but two other people I want to mention, two people that do really good roles that very few people want to do. First is our treasurer. Our treasurer is a retired accountant. I wouldn't want to do that job for all the money, literally. And it's one of those jobs when it's like secretary.
Not in the Liberal Democrats' bank account, John. No.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, to be honest, if you had all the money in the world, it would be an awful lot easier to be the treasurer. So.
That is true. But just someone who can take that hassle away from you. It's like, I mean, me and Laura were talking in a private chat about, we're talking about taxes. That's how exciting our private chats get outside of the podcast. But just one less thing for you to deal with is the money and the regulations, and having someone to do that is really important, because we're all active campaigners. For every hour we're doing stuff like sorting out the finances means we're not out campaigning. And the other guy I want to talk about is Dave Nash, who was the data officer for a long time in Preston as well. Just someone doing stuff like the marked registers, inputting all that stuff, getting lists together for polling day. And now, obviously, he was on to Connect and Minivan very quickly, just sorting out lists for campaigners to go out. So all they have to do is take the phone with them, go out and knock on doors. And again, people, it's so valuable just to give us enough time to go out and win seats and not worrying about the kind of admin behind. So Dave and Mike are absolute, and those are kind of key people. But Lisa, coming back to you, what other kind of roles do you think that we don't appreciate within the party as much as maybe we should?
So we have in Hazel Grove a phenomenal clerical team. We have an operation that I think must be one of the best in the country. And partly that's because of Mary's cakes. So she used to bring a Victoria sponge and used to see it as a badge of honour that she was the one that provided the cake on a Thursday. So we have Clerical Club, obviously not in lockdown, where our volunteers would come and there'd be always something to do, whether it was envelope stuffing or writing blue letters or some data entry or just whatever, bundling, whatever it was, there'd be some clerical. Because we had that regularity, it became a thing, and it was a social event for lots of people, and Mary included. Her face was always a picture when one of our vegan members, Sylvia, used to bring a cake. Mary did not approve of the concept of vegan baking, and her views were made clear repeatedly. But all the rest of us who enjoyed all sorts of baking were delighted to be in the office on a Thursday. So clerical, I think, is something, it's exactly the point you've made, John, about we could all stuff envelopes probably, or the vast majority of us, but is that the right use of our time? So for those volunteers who are better suited or more enthusiastic about knocking on doors, let's get them knocking on doors, not stuffing envelopes. And those people who don't want to knock on doors or can't or whatever, let's make use of them in whatever way we can. So for me, it's clerical. The other thing is not forgetting that all of us can contribute to some elements of what we do. So I think certainly all four of us, and I'm sure people listening, want a strong, growing, thriving Liberal Democrats. It's not just up to candidates to recruit people to the party. It's not just up to Neva Orrell to have recruited people to the party. My last Mary anecdote probably is how she and her old friend Stella, so Stella was elected at 60-something, Stella Humphreys, and served for 30 years, so retired from the council in her mid-90s. And they were a force of nature, the two of them. Mary used to drive Stella because Stella didn't drive, and the two of them were a force of nature. And they recruited a couple to the party in the waiting room at the Chiropodists. And this is a story that both Stella had told and Mary had told, and Marjorie and Jeff, who they recruited, told for many years afterwards, about how they never missed an opportunity to encourage people onto our team. And I think that's something all of us can do. You don't need to be the candidate, you don't need to be a campaign manager to recruit people to the party.
And I suppose when you talk about recruitment, one of the things is actually dealing with members as well. And when we had the campaign organisers roundtables, which we recommend all viewers and listeners to go and check them out because they were very good and actually talk about, the most successful teams are not, I don't have people doing a superhuman amount, but actually spread these roles out. Actually have a diverse group of people actually doing a lot of things. And they were talking about actually dealing with membership. that it's okay. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Hazel Grove and Sheffield have probably got quite large memberships. I mean, myself in Preston, a couple of hundred, Liverpool probably a little bit more. But actually, getting those people involved, even if, like, say, a small fraction of them can take on an extra role, is really important. But if you can have someone's role to try and get people to get into other roles, again, it makes your life so much easier. Now, Richard, what do you think is one of the key roles that someone's doing behind the scenes in Liverpool?
Well, there's no doubt that our membership and our data officers are absolutely key to this. So we're inputting stuff the whole time, from surveys, questionnaires, canvassing and door knocking in normal times, emails that come in, etc. So making sure all that is logged properly and legally these days is something that there's just no way I could do it. And also keeping in regular touch with the members. So every month I do a members newsletter. That's different than ringing them. So our two membership secretaries, we split the post in Liverpool, rang up every member that we had a phone number for, which of course is the vast majority of them, said, "How are you?" So the councillors were talking to people in their wards and they were talking to their members. But I want to just put a question to this distinguished panel of activists here, is have we in some ways hollowed out the work of volunteers? So what did I spend hours and days doing when I first became a member? It was writing envelopes and stuffing them. Now we've got 3 people can keep our headquarters going all day and you don't need to rotate them. We've got someone printing off the addresses onto letters or envelopes or leaflets, depending what we're doing. Depending on the size, most of them go to an envelope stuffing machine. That needs one person to input, and it needs one person to take them out and to bundle into roads or patches, whatever you're doing. So we got through 330,000 leaflets, all of which were addressed, and about, I'm guessing, a third of them went into envelopes with just 9 people, so that we could send people out to other constituencies. Most of our door knockers left us. But we used to bring people in up to 3 or 4 years ago, stuffing parties or writing parties, and those have gone. And so are we being too mechanised in Liverpool? Should we, instead of having most people have a knit and natter, it would appear that in Stockport they have a stuff and chatter, but it's the same thing. Are we missing a trick by being too clever and too mechanised? Discuss.
That's a really interesting discussion, actually, and I'll bring probably Laura in first, because I can see, because I need to gather my thoughts and think. I can see positives and negatives on both sides, so I'll let Laura, because she's smarter than me, so she's probably got an answer off the top of her head.
Oh, I'm just thinking I'd love to have a stuffing machine. Like, a stuffing machine sounds great. So, I'd be happy to swap problems. Look, I think it comes down to know your local party. And, we've had this conversation before about handwriting blue envelopes. Is it a good idea to handwrite blue envelopes because it looks more personal, and also because it, is a way that more and more people can get involved. On the other hand, we can print them, they look fine. And it's a lot quicker and an awful lot easier. And we've been printing our blue envelopes for some time and have not noticed any electoral ill effects. So, and
you can read the envelopes as well.
And you can read the envelope, which is it's not essential, but it is a nice bonus. So yeah, we have this debate quite often. And for me, it just comes down to know your local party. So, some people, we've had this debate, and some people from other local parties have said, well, we have people who can't do anything else, and this is a great way to keep them involved. Like, fantastic. But actually, we had one local elections where our blockage wasn't actually delivering the leaflets or door knocking. It was that we weren't able to get them stuffed and bundled in time. So actually, if we're able to kind of streamline that process and kind of speed it up so that we're not being held back and not having people who are willing to deliver leaflets, but their leaflets aren't ready, which I think is probably like the cardinal Liberal Democrat sin. Great, let's mechanise some more. So I think it comes down to know your local party, what your resources are, and what you'll be doing instead. Because if it means that you're never going to see your volunteers because you only need one person to crank the machine, then that would be pretty sad. But actually, if there's lots of other things that people can be doing and that enables you to kind of do more or to go and help other local parties, then fantastic, that's great, let's do it. And then there's also a kind of money versus time trade-off as well. If you are able to fundraise for sort of more machines, then great. Alternatively, if you've got more volunteers and no money, then probably do more of it by hand.
I think that we sometimes think that volunteers are free, and I think we underestimate the amount of time it takes to manage volunteers and to encourage and incentivize and
take the leaflets round to them to stuff.
All of that. Yeah. And I think that for us, we have so most of the people involved in Hazel Grove are volunteers. We have some counsellors some of whom would consider themselves to be volunteers, others not. And we have a small number of paid staff, and the relationship is different with all of those because you are able to set objectives for your paid staff and you're able to have an appraisal in a way that probably wouldn't feel quite right with volunteers. So I think yes, I completely agree with Laura, as I so often do, that it depends. You've got to know your local party and work out what their needs are. And play to your strengths as well. I think going from zero to amazing is often quite difficult, but if you've already got a fledgling infrastructure that could do some really good clerical, nurture that and see if you can crank it up a bit.
And I think we give enough time, John, to think.
I think it's also like think about what you can do, what you can do instead. Like if you're not spending lots of time stuffing your envelopes, maybe that gives you an opportunity to do a slightly fancier like leaflet drop where you do 3 different types of leaflet and then you interleave them all. So like actually, maybe you can do something that's like even better because you don't have to have dozens of people coming in to stuff envelopes, and instead you've got them interleaving different print, different sizes of leaflet or something. So I think there are kind of, if you can take one thing out, then it doesn't mean that everyone goes home. It could mean you do even more campaigning, because unfortunately it never stops.
So you're not going to believe me, but that actually was the point I was literally going to
make. Oh no, I'm really sorry.
Because I was just reminded how exceptionally cool Laura is by her multi-drop leaflet round.
The automation kind of point of this is, whether that's an envelope stuffing machine or whatever else, which actually if it saves you one job, doesn't mean that you should actually not get those people together to do something else. Because as we all know, and we've had a little bit of this with lockdown, atrophy from not doing stuff is very hard to reverse. And actually when people get used to not doing it, and, again, going back to one of my, to Alan, who kind of bossed my ward for 20 years, he was exceptional at keeping his deliverers going. People who delivered leaflets for now must be about 30 years and who ring me up now and say, it's been a few weeks, focus leaflet coming. That's the kind of people you want. And so, but getting those roles for stuff that is lost is really, so if you're not doing blue letter writing, what could you do instead? Could you do like a phone bank session together or something like that? Other ways you can do it. And, there are now more digital ways to reach voters. How can you use that going forward? And that kind of leads on to other roles we've got, is actually the digital roles within our parties and how we then get the communication out, particularly in this point when, lockdown is still in place for a lot of people. We're not out knocking on doors yet. So actually having a good digital presence is something you can do and start working. And whether that's getting your email lists right. Richard's talked a lot about the success he has with his e-focus and how much people are waiting to receive it. And things like a social media. Does someone actually deal with your social media? How many times, and I don't know from the rest of the group, does your local party put out a social media tweet or a Facebook page announcement or something like that? But vast people in your local party don't retweet it. Do you have a system for getting your message out within your local party? And I suppose a really good role that we've very luckily came on, there was a chap who actually used to interview Richard when he was a student in Liverpool University. He's now, I don't know if you made him become a Lib Dem, Richard, I'm not giving you that credit, but he was a journalist that's now moved back to Lancashire. as he hunts for jobs and whatever else, he's now come on board to do our press releases.
Who
And
is he? Give us a clue.
Who is it? It's Connor. His name was Connor Kiernan.
Yeah.
And so Connor has come on, and in the last, so he got in touch with us. We did this kind of roles thing. I will show all viewers. I did produce this kind of chart of roles, which I will make available to any listener that wants it, and it's all over like kind of ALDC Facebook ones. But he took on board. He said, "Look, I want to deal with the press, if that's okay." And so any stories we get, I mean, we all get the National Party stuff that you can adapt for local purposes. But he has, in his first 2 weeks, has got us on Radio Langs and pretty much had us in 2 stories in the local press every week. Just by having someone taking the time and doing it. Sometimes he has to chase up councillors that aren't answering. But that, again, a really good role for someone who actually doesn't want to be front of house, but actually behind the scenes knows about communications and marketing, and that's really helped us, particularly at this time.
So question 1 is, are we doing a skills audit to find out what people can do on the way that you just said? Because we've got 450 members, something like that. I know what some of them do. So I know what our data officer does. He deals with data on a daily basis in a university. What other skills we got? We know someone who's a solicitor, so everything we're committing libel, we ask him. But I don't know what the vast majority of my members do, and perhaps they'd like to be involved occasionally by ringing up saying, "Could you help us with this one?" rather than "There's 3,000 leaflets, could you get them out by Tuesday?"
I think this is such an important point that Richard is making, and I think it links as well with our need and our desire as a party to be really inclusive and really accessible. So we shouldn't have barriers for people getting involved in the party. So some roles are right for some people and not right for everybody. There are roles that you can do when the kids are in bed or when your caring responsibilities are taking a pause. There are roles that are really physical, roles that are not, and you don't need to leave the house about. And I think we, as activists and as members of local parties, need to remember that we need a range of things that people can get involved with. And it's not just about delivering leaflets and knocking on doors. There are different things that will suit different people depending on their circumstances.
So something that we've talked about doing, and we haven't done it yet, so might not work. I can come back and let you know. But sort of one of the things that we've been had a bit of trouble with skills audits in the past is that people will come back with a bunch of skills, and some of them it's really obvious, like, oh, you do data, great, you can do some data analysis for us. And some of them it's much less obvious how the skills that people have are kind of applicable to the local party, and people don't really know which of their skills we're talking about. So kind of one of the things that we've kind of talked about doing, and actually maybe we'll do it with John's handy little sheet of roles, is actually going the other way and being like, here are some of the skills that we are looking for, or do you have them? But looking, really breaking down absolutely everything that we do. And then at the end saying, and is there anything else that you think might be handy? But, do we have people who, have particular expertise in, in social media or in data or in law or in, or in fixing things, actually, people really good at fixing things? Because actually, if you can come in and fix like the folding machine, that's pretty useful. Are you really good at DIY? Well, if so, you might be quite good at stake boards. Like, a lot of these skills, like people might not realize that, actually being a DIY demon is a useful Liberal Democrat skill, but it really is, because actually, like, some of the places that I've seen our people get a stake board up, like, I would never have thought of that. That's a proper skill.
Yeah.
And I think I know I started talking about cake with Met and her legendary pavlova at the beginning, but I think don't underestimate some of those other skills. So making sure a committee room is properly catered so that the team is well fed, but not so well fed that they need a good sit down and can't go out for the next round of knocking up, is a really important skill. So we'll have volunteers who wouldn't dream of knocking on a door, but would love to do a nice spread for a committee room.
Yeah.
We have a councillor who is not able to knock on doors or deliver leaflets anymore, but you used to be a professional chef. And I can say if you don't have any local councillors or activists who used to be professional chefs, all I can do is that I can suggest that you find one, because it's amazing. It's just amazing. You go to an action day.
It's not formal ones.
Yeah, and it's like, you go to it's when you get to the middle of May and you realise, like, oh, I'm going to have to get my own lunch this weekend. How am I going to manage that? Because you can't just go to an action day and rely on them to provide you with a great lunch.
But a lovely story from my past is that the leader of the Liberal Party on Bradford Council always used to make a profit by selling his election address. So you think, I wish we could all do that. But he was called, I hope I get this the right way around, but he was called Paul Hockney, and his brother was David Hockney. So these election addresses used to get auctioned for a fortune. Now, I'm not saying you've got a brother who can do all this, but perhaps you've got a retired art teacher. If we're talking about retired teachers, what are those skills out there? You can say, oh, I'll have a go at this leaflet. And they say, oh, no, I can do that. That's what I did. We always used to do that. So those skills are there when you actually talk to our members.
One of the things I do worry about, though, and I don't know how we get better at this, is, all of these things, you can do if you're in an active local party and you have somebody who kind of reaches out to us. And absolutely, we all need to be better at kind of enabling people to use their skills for the party. But I do worry about how poor we are at supporting people who are in local parties where it's not nearly as active to get involved. And actually a lot of these skills are things that you can do from anywhere. Like some of it, okay, if you want to deliver a leaflet or knock on the door, then you pretty much need to be in the same place. Okay, phoning you can do from everywhere, but mostly you need to be in that place. And the same goes for things like state boards or clerical, you have to be there. But actually a lot of this digital stuff you could be anywhere. So how are we kind of reaching out to people who live in, let's call it, Black Holeville? You live in Black Holeville and there's maybe 3 other Liberal Democrats, but, you join and you're young and keen and interested. How do we reach that person? And I don't know, I suppose, if we knew the answer to that, the party would be flying and we'd be fine. But, yeah, I don't, it's a real problem, and I don't know how we overcome it.
It's a bugbear of mine. I think based on, if you can join the party on one side of the road, which is one side of the boundary, and you get a completely different experience if your local party is active and thriving compared to the one over the other side of the road. And I agree strongly with Laura's point. I think one of the things that we can do more of as a party is to strengthen some of our SAOs and AOs. So some of those organisations that John has been interviewing as part of the virtual conference that he's been running on the pod, I think there is always space for competent officers in those. They need a treasurer, they need a chair to make stuff happen, they need people to actually do the things. I think as long as elections are run on geographical boundaries, though, there will always be a geographical element to what we do and how we campaign. But I think Laura's right. We haven't yet nailed how to give people a good rounded experience that doesn't necessarily depend heavily on where they are.
I was very interested when we did the organisers round table. Mary Renier Wilson she's on one of the federal boards, or I'm not sure which one it is, was talking actually about having some sort of volunteer progression. And it's really, instead of it being, okay, you start off doing leaflets, then you know what, you'll be a councillor. And that's kind of all you've got to kind of go for, is actually having like a tree of progression. So volunteer, and you see it from really good voluntary agencies and charity agencies and stuff like that. There's a not a strata in terms of I'm more important than you, but there are different avenues for people to go to get fulfillment and progress within an organisation. And I think when we are, like Lisa was saying, a lot of our some of her councillors consider themselves volunteers as well, because they've got jobs and family commitments and everything else. Actually having some sort of tree-like structure, so it's not a one-size-fits-all, I think is really important to Lib Dems. And if we're going to get past what Dorothy Thornhill said in her review about, kind of insular little teams working out of London, and actually we want our party to grow and flourish in areas like we all represent, then we're going to need to get the volunteers on side as well.
But is that what most of our volunteers want, John? I mean, in my ward, I have more people deliver leaflets who aren't members than who are.
Oh,
but even the members love doing things in their patch, and they also run the church and do this and that. But their patch means everything to them. They don't want progression. But if people do, I pick up the point that should you say, oh, a volunteer is a deliverer. But if we do the skills audit, what do you know about? What are you interested? What can you do? Then surely we can find a job for anyone around those three ideas.
And that was the point I meant. If you're happy, like I said, like yourself, I've got people who aren't even members who have been delivering leaflets for me for 10 years, and that's absolutely fine. And if people just want to deliver leaflets or I am absolutely delighted with that. That is no problem whatsoever. But I think the fault is that we don't, and I can use my own example. When I first got active after I finished uni, someone in the local Preston party came round to my house to welcome me. I sent in my email, whatever, and just dumped some blue letters on me. Didn't ask at all what I wanted to do, because I was really interested in policy and whatever else and getting more active than just blue letters. But sometimes we just kind of think, okay, you're at the lowest rung, boom, there's your leaflets. When actually, if there's making sure people know, actually you can do as much or as little as you want, I think is key.
Perhaps we ought to do Lib Dem badges, like the Scouts, like Rhizo operator or first class deliverer or something.
You joke, but Curtis and I did talk about doing that, and having different stripes as well. So, if you were able to print on the Rhizo, you'd get your original badge. Whereas, if you could repair the Rhizo, you'd get the stripe for your Rhizo operator's badge, the Scouts. I should point out that we didn't actually do this. We spent a few minutes talking about it.
That you were in at the time.
I don't think we were in the pub. I think we were in our office late at night printing and fighting with the Rhizo. So, but I think
the
morally we were
wing
in
of the Lib Dems emerging here, John. I think you ought to stop.
I'm more worried about Lisa's
the provisional
reaction.
wing of the Lib Dem, extreme leafleting.
We were joking, weren't we, Laura?
yeah, absolutely, definitely joking.
Yeah, good. This does segue nicely into the next podcast we're having, doesn't it, John? Or the one we're recording.
Well, I'm very conscious. I think Lisa wants to come in because I do realise that Lisa has to go soon as well. Or was that just those two being corporate Kemp and and Commander Gordon there for the Lib Dem?
Commander.
I don't know. They were running beavers or something. I'm not quite sure, but it was. No, I think let's focus on winning elections. I mean, of course we all are. Yeah, okay.
But it is, and I'm just so listeners, and we're coming to the end of this, but like I say, I'll put a download link to these volunteer roles that I came up with. This was just off my own bat. This isn't like a kind of an official party list, but it was just something, okay, what can we offer people? I have no idea if their skills are in any way useful or whatever. It was a start off for 10. And actually, I've filled 4 of the roles already with people coming forward saying, actually, I could do that. So I'll put a link to that so people can download it. But what Richard's alluded to is actually we have an episode coming up, which we are recording next week, where we have a Harvard professor coming on who's written a book about whether politics is a hobby and how many people see it as a hobby. Or do you treat politics as a hobby, or are you in it to make change? And I haven't quite finished his book. By the time we get there, I will have finished his book. But it's an interesting thing that when you look at our members, when I ask this question, a third of our listeners and viewers thought that politics was a hobby. It wasn't really about making change. So that's something we've got to consider when these roles are so. And again, one of the things we haven't talked about in this whole episode is actually making sure it's fun. If the vast majority, if it seems like a bind and people have got other things you would like to do, because you're not going to become a millionaire by being a Lib Dem activist or counsellor, although Lisa Smart's got that many jobs, she might be, I'm not sure. But
voluntary, John.
Yes, that's true.
What about a comedian's badge? That might work.
Well, yeah, I'm not getting that one anytime soon. But actually making it fun. Because if it's enjoyable, people will keep doing it. And again, the organisers roundtable said, if your person hates door knocking but is happy on the phone, don't force them to go on the door. Let them do them on the phone and they're going to enjoy it more. But
I
no.
refer you to my earlier comments about cake, and that is the last thing I will say in this episode.
There we go. If we can end all episodes with cake, I think that works. Is always a good thing. But thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do let us know. Do comment. What roles do you want to see in the party that don't get highlighted enough? Is it someone who deals with social media? Is it someone that just deals with the membership letters or deals with the data? What are the key roles you think that don't get highlighted in our party? Would love to hear from you. By all means, do like, share, comment, all the things that you normally do. We want to thank so many listeners. We've actually doubled our listenership since lockdown began. So thank you to all those people who are new and have come on to the pod. We really appreciate it. You can listen to this from all your normal podcast providers, or you can watch on YouTube and on Facebook now. So there's even more ways for you to take in as much Lib Dem pod as you want. All previous episodes are on there as well. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next episode.